Hi, I'm David Hadbonic, and I'm going to do a short presentation on what makes a good sentence. So, what makes a good sentence? I'd like you to take a moment and just write down really quickly, maybe even if it's one word that pops to mind, what in your mind makes for a good sentence. So, you might have said clarity, you might have said punchiness, something that grabs your attention, surprises you, something that's with strong, active imagery. You might have said something that's provocative. I want to talk about context, though, because I feel like that really governs this whole sense of what kind of a sentence is good and what's appropriate to the situation. So we've got the formal side of things, an academic essay. That's going to call for a bit more complexity, maybe a bit longer sentences, and so-called formal English, right? Journalism, still on the formal side, not as specialized as different disciplines in the academic world, but still, we're going to want to follow certain conventions that we maybe or otherwise wouldn't. Fiction, I put a question mark here because we think of fiction as being literary, right? But within that, there's a lot of variation. There could be dialogue, there could be dialect, there could be all sorts of different levels of formality within a story, within a novel. And then we've also got poetry and plays, things like that. On the informal side of things, there's a text message where we're just in a rush to say something and we're abbreviating, spelling things however, any which way, using emojis. Tweets, you might put a little more thought and care into that. Again, you might be using images, you might be using clips, you might be using characters and things like that. Email, and I put a question mark here too because this could be on the formal side if we're addressing an employer or a professor or a teacher, but we also could be writing to a friend or a family member, somebody that we're just dashing a message off to. So again, depending on the context here, that's really going to determine what makes a good sentence within that. So, but by and large, there are some things we could look out for that could really help us to avoid heading out in the wrong direction and also get us going in the right direction. So things to avoid: passive voice, and this right here is what I see a lot in academic writing, even my own sometimes. God forbid. What will be argued in this paper is that, and what's grating here a little bit is that passive voice is associated with trying to avoid responsibility, trying to make it sound very impersonal, right? Mistakes were made, avoiding that subject that would maybe get somebody in trouble. So, as opposed to that, active voice, I would argue that direct to the point. Your reader is going to appreciate this and feel a bit more confidence in you the more you use this active and direct voice. We can avoid being overly abstract, complex, using needless jargon, right? Bill utilizes the communications technology. Now, we might be tempted to do this, especially in the academic setting, because we want to sound smart. We want to sound like we know a lot of difficult vocabulary words. And in some cases, jargon might be called for, depending on the discipline we're writing about. But by and large, right, again, let's use clear and concrete terms. Bill used the phone. Your reader is going to understand that. They're not going to have to stretch. They're going to really plug into your writing more and stay with your writing more when you use clear and concrete words. Avoid trying to cram too much in. And I'm not going to put examples for these last couple things, but we all know what this looks like. We've got too many ideas, we've got too much to say, we're in a rush to say it, and everything just gets jumbled up and we lose track of thoughts. the reader gets to the end of a sentence and they really have no idea what's being argued or the statement that's being made. And so to get around this, right, use punctuation and conjunctions. They're your friends. They're marking pauses. They're marking shifts in thought. And you can learn a lot of rules, and you can try to memorize those rules, and you can have a grammar book by your side, but you can also read sentences out loud. That's a great way to hear the flow of the thought and the flow of the sentences. You can read them to somebody, one of your classmates, a family member. You can ask them if they understand what's being written. And if they're having trouble, that's a sign that you need some punctuation there. You need these little nuts and bolts, the conjunctions, and the pauses to sort of help separate things out and give your reader time to catch up. All right, sentence types. There's simple sentences that are expressing one idea. This imperative here, look out! There's also, this is really memorable use in a poem, we real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight. That's the first part of a poem, a rather short poem. It goes on for a few more lines by Gwendolyn Brooks, 20th century black American poet. And you'll notice here there are a series of one-syllable words, 3-word sentences, each one expressing one thought, one idea. There's a real nice rhythm to it. You probably don't want to use rhyme as she's using in everyday writing, but it's effective. Don't avoid simple sentences because you think it doesn't make you sound smart enough, right? It's a good way to mix up the rhythm, to vary the rhythm. Compound sentences, we're joining equally important ideas. So you can put wings on a pig, comma, but you don't make it an eagle. That's attributed to Bill Clinton, former president. Could have written it a couple different ways. All right, in this example, semicolon, no conjunction. This example, semicolon, and however, comma. Maybe sounds a little more formal. The first example, though, is nice rhythmically. You may not notice this, but on either side of the word but, in that first example, you got the exact same number of syllables. There's a real nice balance to it. So you can play around with these, but equally important ideas. There needs to be a balance. Compound sentences with one idea being more important than the others. Mendocino County is a place in California where you can dive for oysters. That first part up to the word California, that's an idea on its own. Where you can dive for oysters, that's an added on part, and I'll explain why in a second. Here's another example. Because they have become scarce, comma, oyster diving is strictly regulated. Now the parts of both these sentences that are in italics are the subordinate clauses. And you can tell that because they have these signal words. In the first sentence it's where, in the second sentence it's because. And you'll notice that the subordinate clause can either be at the end or the beginning of a sentence. Doesn't really matter. But it has to have one of these signal words to let you know. Sometimes there's punctuation, sometimes not. Okay, we've got a less important idea, but it's there to help modify, to help explain a little bit more about what's going on. Compound complex sentences. We got multiple ideas. Some are more important, some are less so. In this case, we have experienced unparalleled natural disasters. Again, that's an idea on its own. That have devastated entire countries. Subordinate clause. But the writer wants to express a little bit more, so we get this last bit. Comma, yet identifying global warming as the cause of these disasters is difficult. So here there's a number of ideas that are being put together, and because the writer wants to express this complex overall idea, they're put together in this compound complex sentence. And you can use these as little modules that you can move around. You're going to need to rely on these signal words and punctuation. And again, think about the rhythm and the main thing that you want to say. These are all things that we need to think about, learn about as we're putting together our arguments. Final thoughts. This is the last sentence in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Okay, so spoiler alert, this is how the book ends. So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. And what's happening here, it's kind of breaking some of the rules I just mentioned, right? It begins with a simple active idea and a concrete image of this person rowing against the current here. That's the descriptive phrase, but it concludes with a passive voice and an abstract term. Those are two things I mentioned to avoid at the beginning. So is it effective, and if so, why? I mean, I think it is. It's actually a pretty famous last line. The narrator here is reflecting on all the events that have happened in the novel, this character Gatsby. And I find that what's effective here, we've got a really nice rhythm to the phrasing. You know, each little phrase is a little bit longer than the one that came before. This nice repetition of the B sounds that make it sound like something's bobbing on the water, and it really just mimics the motion of what it's describing. You know, Fitzgerald was a student of poetry. He was really great at this, and I don't think it's something that we need to aspire to in our everyday writing, but the lesson, you know, to think about rhythm, think about context, think about how something sounds and what it's trying to express is really what I want you to come away from this with. So good luck writing sentences. I hope this has been helpful. I'm David Hedbonick. Thank you.